Story credited to Jason Miller. I'm not the superstitious type, but last New Year's Eve I learned that some warnings, some gut feelings, you just shouldn't ignore. The plan seemed innocent enough. My best friend Mark had rented a cabin for the weekend. You know, one of those Airbnb places where people go to unplug. Except this one felt way more remote than the description let on. And believe me, it's important you know that up front. I almost didn't go. Mark is a good guy, always organizing something, but I'd been feeling burnt out from work. Then Sarah texted me. She's been my closest friend since high school. You know, the kind of friend who can talk you into anything. Come on, Jace, you can't bail now. It'll be fun. You need this, she said. And she was right, I did need a break. I figured a quiet cabin, a few friends, and a chill New Year's, why not? So we drove up together, just me and Sarah. It was about an hour out of town, but the deeper we got into the woods, the quieter it became. No streetlights, no houses for miles, just trees and snow, and the further we went, the less I liked it. It felt deserted. You ever get that feeling like you've just made a mistake, but you're too far in to turn back? When we finally reached the place, my stomach twisted. The cabin was in the middle of nowhere, and I'm not talking rustic getaway. I mean, this thing looked like it had been left to rot. The paint was peeling, windows streaked with grime. There wasn't another soul around, just miles of trees surrounding us. I looked at Sarah and she gave me this little laugh, nervous, like she was trying to brush off the feeling, but I could tell she felt it too. "You sure this is it?" she asked, checking the address on her phone for like the third time. I nodded, pulling up the message from Mark. "Yeah, this is it." Mark was already supposed to be here. In fact, he'd promised us he'd be waiting with food, drinks, the whole New Year's setup. But when we pulled up to the driveway, the place was dark. No music, no lights. "Maybe he's running late," I said, but I didn't believe it. Mark isn't the type to leave people hanging like that. Sarah and I got out of the car, the snow crunching under our boots, and immediately the cold bit into my skin. The air was so still it felt wrong. We headed to the porch. I knocked on the door. Nothing. "Mark?" I called out. No answer, not even an echo. I pulled out my phone, but of course no service. No Wi-Fi either. That's when Sarah nudged me and pointed to the side of the house. Mark's car was there, parked, keys still in the ignition. "Jace, where is he?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was Mark was here, or had been, but there was no sign of him. The weird thing was, the car. Why would he leave the keys in the ignition, and no footprints in the snow? It didn't make any sense. "Maybe he went for a walk," I suggested, but my own voice sounded ridiculous. Who goes for a walk in the middle of the woods at night, and in the dead of winter? We should have left right then and there. I know that now. But at the time, it felt like we were already in too deep. Plus, what if Mark was in trouble? What if something had happened to him? We decided to check inside the cabin. The door was unlocked, and I wish it hadn't been. Inside, it was dark except for the faint glow of the moon through the dirty windows. The place was sparse. Old furniture, a couch, a coffee table, and this massive stone fireplace. I called out again, "Mark!" But only silence answered. The air in there was thick with dust, like no one had touched the place in years. Sarah was pacing, clearly freaked out. "Jace, this doesn't feel right. We should go." I was about to agree when I noticed something on the table. Mark's phone, just sitting there, screen cracked like it had been dropped in a hurry. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. Mark would never just leave his phone behind, especially with all of us on our way. He's glued to that thing. Sarah grabbed my arm. "Jason, we need to leave." She was right, but before I could move, we both heard it. A creak like a footstep coming from upstairs. We both froze. I swear, my heart stopped for a second. The cabin was small. There was no way Mark could have been upstairs this whole time without us knowing. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely above a breath. I nodded, trying to convince myself that maybe it was just the old wood settling. Maybe it was nothing. But deep down, I knew. We weren't alone in that cabin. I didn't want to check upstairs. God knows I didn't. But something in me needed to know. Needed to confirm that there was nothing there. That Mark was okay. "I'll go look," I said, my voice sounding far more confident than I felt. Sarah grabbed my hand. Don't, please, let's just leave. But I couldn't. I slowly made my way to the staircase, each step creaking under my weight. Sarah stayed at the bottom, her face pale, watching me like she expected something awful to happen. The upstairs was dark. My phone's flashlight barely cut through the shadows. There were 2 doors, one open, leading into what looked like a bedroom, and one closed at the end of the hall. I checked the bedroom first. Nothing. Just an old bed covered in dust, a window that looked out over the frozen lake, and nothing else. But that door at the end of the hall, it was closed, but not locked. I could see the faintest crack of light underneath, like someone had left a lamp on inside. I reached for the handle, my hand shaking. As soon as I touched it, there was another noise. But this time, it was a voice, a whisper, from behind the door. I yanked my hand back like I'd been burned. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I don't know what made me do it, but I turned and bolted down the stairs, grabbing Sarah by the arm. "We're leaving, now!" We ran. I didn't care anymore if Mark was pranking us or if something had happened to him. My gut was screaming at me to get out, and I wasn't going to ignore it anymore. We jumped into the car and I floored it. The tires slipped on the ice as we sped down the dark road. My hands were shaking, and Sarah was staring out the window, pale as a ghost. I didn't stop until we hit the highway, and even then, neither of us said a word. We didn't talk about what we heard, or what might have been behind that door. The next day, I tried calling Mark again, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I haven't heard from him since. That was the longest night of my life. And if I've learned anything, it's this. If something doesn't feel right, trust your gut. And never, ever go looking for answers you're not ready to find. Story credited to Jake Turner. You know, New Year's Eve is supposed to be fun, right? Like, you think about what you want for the next year. Maybe make a couple resolutions you won't keep, drink with friends. You never expect something to go wrong. Not really. But sometimes, it's the things you don't expect that stick with you. I'm Jake, just a regular guy from Ohio. And what I'm about to tell you, it's not some wild ghost story or anything you'd find in a horror movie. It's just real life, and that's what makes it worse. It was New Year's Eve, and my girlfriend Sarah and I were heading over to our friend Will's house. Will had this little place just outside of town. Nothing fancy, but comfortable enough to have a few people over. We weren't doing anything big, just a small get-together, like we had for the past few years. You know, one of those we're too old to go out clubbing, but not old enough to stay in and do nothing kind of things. There were only going to be 5 of us. Me, Sarah, Will, his girlfriend Jess, and our buddy Brian. We'd been a tight-knit group since college, and while we had all moved on to different jobs and responsibilities, we always made time for each other on nights like this. The drive was uneventful. It was cold, typical Ohio winter, but there wasn't much snow on the ground and the roads were clear. Sarah was scrolling through her phone while I drove, reading off some random resolutions people were posting on social media. We laughed about how half of them wouldn't make it past January, just like every year. When we got to Will's place, it was already dark out. His house was at the end of this cul-de-sac, just far enough from the city lights that it felt isolated. I remember thinking how quiet it was when we stepped out of the car. Too quiet, actually. I brushed it off at the time. It's winter, right? No birds, no wind, nothing. Inside, the house was warm, and Will and Jess had set up some drinks and snacks. The vibe was super chill. We were all in sweaters and jeans, nothing fancy, and we settled into the living room to hang out and catch up. At first, it was fun. We reminisced about old New Year's parties from back in college, how we'd stay up all night, crashing on someone's couch or floor, waking up hungover and vowing never to drink again. Then, around 10:30, Will brought out this old camcorder he'd found in his attic. It was one of those really outdated ones, the kind people used before smartphones became a thing. He was joking about how he used to record everything back in high school. Random road trips, skateboarding, parties. We laughed and passed it around, checking out the old footage. Grainy shots of us being idiots at 19, a couple of blurry faces I didn't even remember, and a lot of random street shots. Sarah leaned against me, shaking her head at how ridiculous we looked. It was embarrassing, but funny. But then, something changed. As the footage played, there was this moment where the camera panned to a group of people at some house party. And I don't know why, but something about it made the room feel colder. I couldn't explain it. It was just this random scene, nothing sinister. But in the background, I noticed this guy, just standing there. He wasn't talking, wasn't moving, just watching. Not part of the group, but still there. You know how sometimes someone's presence feels wrong? Like they don't belong? That's what it was like. I pointed him out, half joking. "Who's that creep?" Will laughed. "No idea, man. I don't even remember this party. Must have been one of those nights." We shrugged it off and kept watching, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My mind kept drifting back to that guy in the video. It was stupid, right? Just some random person. But still, I couldn't get past it. The night went on, and we got closer to midnight. Will, being the tech geek that he is, suggested we all record New Year's messages on his old camcorder, just for fun, like a time capsule to look back on in a few years. Everyone thought it was a cool idea, so we each took a turn, holding the camcorder and saying a little something to our future selves. Brian went first. "Hey, it's Brian. Hope I'm rich in 5 years, or at least not living with my parents anymore." Jess was next, laughing as she made some silly joke about hoping she finally learned how to cook. Then it was Sarah's turn. She smiled at the camera, a little tipsy, but still her usual upbeat self. "Sarah here. I hope Jake and I finally take that trip we've been talking about, and I hope we're still happy." Finally, it was my turn. I don't know why, but when I held that camcorder, it felt heavier than it should have. I stared at the lens for a second before I spoke, my reflection staring back at me. "It's Jake. I hope things are still good. You know, life, work, all that." I forced a smile, but even as I said the words, something felt wrong. Like I was saying them to someone else, not my future self. Someone was listening. I handed the camcorder back to Will, who grinned and said something cheesy into it about living in the moment. We all laughed, and for a few minutes, everything felt normal again. Then, as the clock hit midnight, things got weird. We counted down, cheered, and clinked our glasses together, but almost immediately after, the power flickered, just once. The lights dimmed for a split second before coming back on. We all froze. Will joked about how it was probably just the old wiring, but you could feel it in the air. Something wasn't right. Sarah nudged me. "Did you see that?" Before I could respond, the camcorder in Will's hand beeped. It had powered off on its own. He frowned and tried turning it back on, but the screen stayed black. "Must have finally died," he said, shrugging. "Things ancient." But as we sat there in silence, something strange happened. A faint sound came from the living room window. It was subtle, but in that quiet room, it felt deafening, like a soft scraping against the glass. We all turned at the same time, staring at the window. There was nothing outside, just the reflection of the room and the faint glow of the street lamp. Will, trying to lighten the mood, stood up and walked over. "It's probably just a branch or something." He pulled the curtain back. There was nothing. No tree branch, no snow falling, nothing that could have made that sound. But then we saw it. The reflection, the guy from the camcorder, standing right behind us. I didn't even turn around at first. I just froze, staring at the glass, hoping, praying. It was some trick of the light. But when Sarah grabbed my arm, squeezing hard enough to hurt, I knew it wasn't just me. I turned my head slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. And there he was. The same guy. The same blank expression. Just standing there in the corner of the room. No one moved. No one said a word. We just stared at him. I could hear Sarah's breathing quicken, feel her trembling beside me. Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, the lights flickered again, and he was gone. We left the house after that. No goodbyes, no explanations, just grabbed our coats and bolted. I haven't talked to Will since that night, and I don't know if I ever will. Sarah and I don't talk about it either. We pretend it never happened. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that guy, the one we saw in the camcorder footage, and I wonder, did we call him, or did he find us? Story credited to Daniel Miller. I'm not the kind of guy who gets easily freaked out. I've always been logical, you know? I work in finance, I like structure, facts, things that make sense. But what happened last New Year's Eve at Kevin's house? I still don't have an explanation for it. And believe me, I've tried. It was supposed to be a quiet night. Me, my girlfriend Megan, and a few close friends. You know how it is. We were all kind of over the huge parties by then, done with loud bars, drunk strangers spilling drinks on you. Instead, we just wanted a relaxed night at Kevin's new place. He had moved a little outside Pittsburgh into this old house on the outskirts of town. Quiet neighborhood. Nothing really around it but woods and a few scattered houses. Perfect for getting away from everything for a bit. We got there around 8 p.m. It was cold. That kind of bone-chilling cold where even a quick walk from the car to the front door makes you shiver. The sky was clear, no snow, just one of those crisp, dark winter nights where every noise seems louder than usual. Megan and I walked up the stone path to Kevin's place, and I remember thinking, this is a great spot for a quiet night. Kevin met us at the door, all excited. "You guys made it!" He hugged Megan, gave me a firm handshake, and led us into the living room. It was just the six of us: Kevin, his girlfriend Emily, Megan, me, and our friends Jake and Sarah. The house was a little older than I expected. Dark wooden floors, high ceilings, and those old-style light fixtures that barely light up the room, you know? But the fireplace was crackling, and Kevin had already opened a couple of beers, so it felt cozy enough. The first few hours were great. We were all sitting around the fire, sharing stupid stories from the past year, eating pizza, drinking beers. The kind of night where nothing special happens, but it's fun because it's just good company. We started talking about our plans for the next year, half-hearted resolutions we knew we wouldn't keep. Jake, being Jake, made this joke about running a marathon, and Sarah, his girlfriend, laughed, calling him out on it, saying he could barely run a mile. It was around 11 when things started to feel off. Kevin, who had been quiet for a few minutes, stood up and said, "I gotta show you guys something." He walked over to the corner of the room where there was this old wooden chest. I hadn't noticed it before, but now that I was paying attention, it looked a little out of place. It was scratched up, the kind of thing you might find at a yard sale or in someone's attic. Definitely not something that would fit in a modern living room. "What's in there?" Megan asked, leaning forward a bit. Kevin opened the chest and pulled out this old, dusty lantern. I couldn't tell if it was antique or just beat up, but it was weird. He set it on the coffee table and said, "I found this when I moved in. I don't know why, but I've kept it." Emily shifted on the couch, looking uncomfortable. "It's kind of creepy," she said, half laughing, but you could tell she wasn't really joking. "Where'd it come from?" Kevin shrugged. "Previous owners, I guess. This house has been around for a while. I tried cleaning it up once, but I don't know, I stopped." That's when Megan said something that still gives me chills when I think about it. "Why does it feel like someone's watching us?" Her voice wasn't shaky, but she sounded serious. The room went quiet. Not because of what she said, but because in that moment there was this weird shift. The fire crackled softly in the background, but everything else seemed to fall silent. No creaks from the house settling, no wind outside, nothing. I felt it too, a tension I couldn't explain. Jake, of course, being the jokester, laughed and grabbed the lantern. "What's the big deal? It's just some old piece of junk. Want me to throw it out?" Kevin quickly shook his head. No, leave it. It's just a weird thing. Let's get back to celebrating." But from then on, the mood was off. We tried to get back to the fun conversations, but the energy was different. Megan kept glancing at the lantern, and Emily looked like she wanted to say something, but didn't. Around 11:45, we heard it. A faint knock at the door. Not loud, not urgent, just a knock. Kevin got up, thinking maybe one of the neighbors was dropping by to say hello, or maybe someone was lost. But when he opened the door, there was no one there. Just the cold, dark night and a few scattered branches blowing in the breeze. He closed the door, locked it, and came back, a little confused but brushing it off. Then the knock came again, this time louder. 4 sharp knocks, one after the other. Jake stood up. "All right, who's messing with us? Is this some New Year's prank?" But no one was outside. Again. This time, we were all on edge. Emily moved closer to Kevin, and I grabbed Megan's hand. I could feel her fingers trembling, but she didn't say anything. No one did, not for a few minutes. Then Sarah whispered, "Maybe we should go." Kevin shook his head. No, It's probably just kids. You know how people are on New Year's, right? But I could see the doubt in his eyes. He wasn't buying his own explanation. The knocks came again, but this time it wasn't the door. It was coming from the back of the house. Kevin, looking a little pale, grabbed a flashlight and motioned for Jake to follow him. "Let's check it out," he muttered, though I could tell he didn't want to. They disappeared into the hallway, leaving the rest of us huddled in the living room. I could hear my own heartbeat loud in my ears, and I knew Megan was just as scared. She whispered, "I don't like this, Daniel. I really don't." I didn't either, but what could we do? The air felt heavy, like we were waiting for something bad to happen, but didn't know what. When Kevin and Jake came back, they were both pale. Kevin shook his head. "There's nothing back there," he said quietly. "No one's outside. We checked the whole yard." We all just sat there trying to figure out what to do next. Then, without warning, the lantern on the coffee table flickered. Not like a battery running out, more like someone had turned it on just for a second. Emily gasped, grabbing Kevin's arm. "What the hell was that?" I stood up, pulling Megan with me. "I think we need to leave." But before anyone could move, the knocking started again, this time all around us. It was like it was coming from the walls, the ceiling, everywhere at once. Loud, insistent, surrounding us. Kevin bolted for the door, and we all followed. We didn't stop to grab our coats, our bags, nothing. Just ran out into the cold night, the sound of those knocks echoing in my ears. We didn't say a word until we got back to our cars. Megan was shaking, trying to catch her breath. "What was that, Daniel? What was that?" I didn't have an answer then, and I still don't. We never went back to Kevin's house after that night. He moved out a few months later, said he couldn't stand being there anymore. But I don't blame him. Sometimes when I'm alone, I still hear it. That knocking. Soft at first, but then louder. Like it's trying to remind me of something I can't explain. And every New Year's Eve, I stay home now. Because whatever that was, I don't want to know what happens if you stay in the quiet house too long.